Anxiety is a common experience. Most people know what it's like to have ruminating thoughts and physical sensations of anxiety like racing heartbeat, trouble breathing, or that impending sense of doom that you might get. But what do you do when your anxiety seems like it's at a 10 out of 10 every single day? This is episode 407 of the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. My name is Dr. Robert Duff. I'm a clinical psychologist from Southern California, and today I have a question and answer episode for you. The first question today is from somebody who is struggling really bad with anxiety to the point that they're dissociating from reality, and they're having a hard time with their functional skills like going to work or going to the grocery store. So I give them some immediate tips and things that they can focus on right now, as well as some hope for the future. And for the second question, we have something a little bit different. Somebody who feels that their career path might not be sustainable for them, and they're thinking about going back to school to pursue a different career path, something a lot of us can relate to. So make sure that you're subscribed and let's jump into it. Hello, friends of all varieties. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope that you're doing well. Please remember that you can send me questions or topics for the show. Also guests, if you have people that you'd like me to talk to my contact page. duffthepsych.com/contact is where you can find all of that, the contact form. Send me a question on there and I'd love to hear from you. Please also feel free to give me some feedback about the episodes. Recently, as you probably noticed, I've been doing things a little bit differently. I've been focusing a bit more on video as well as the audio podcast. So some things that I've been trying have been a deviation from what I normally do, especially for the audio podcast. So I'd love to hear from you if this is something that you've enjoyed, if this is something that's been neutral, or if there's anything that you've had a problem with that you just want me to know about. Please, same thing, contact form, let me know what's going on. But yeah, that's about enough of that. Let's jump into the first question. It reads, "Hello, I recently discovered your podcast, so I'm not sure if you've touched on why I'm here. I have terrible anxiety on a daily basis. I live my life at a 10 every single day. I'm on the edge every single day. I think I suffer from derealization. I've tried deep breathing. I've tried all sorts of methods and techniques to calm my anxiety, but nothing will work. I need to go to work, but I'm too scared. I'm too scared to go to grocery stores sometimes, or when I'm in a grocery store, I am scared. I'm not sure what my question here is, but I think I just need to know, is this who I am now? Am I my anxiety? I fear I'll never be able to not be anxious. I anticipate my anxiety. I wait for my anxiety to show up. Is it possible to be normal again?" So thank you for writing in. This is a really good question. And I think there are probably a good number of people in the community that are listening or watching that have been in this place before. I also, though, know a lot of these people are no longer suffering from such intense anxiety where it's interfering with their life to this degree. So there's definitely some hope for you. First thing I'll say is if you are not yet a member of the Hardcore Self-Help community on Facebook, definitely check it out. I know not everybody has a Facebook, but it's a great community. Just search for Hardcore Self-Help or go facebook.com/groups/Hardcore Self-Help. It's a great place to get empathy and tips from others. Questions like this are definitely welcome there. And you can hear more about what maybe has worked or hasn't worked from other people who have been in situations that are similar to yours. What you're describing here is pretty severe anxiety. The feeling that you're at a 10 and on edge every single day is brutal and exhausting, right? So let's see if we can give you some ideas. From the way that you phrased your question, it sounds like you haven't always felt this way. And I'm definitely curious about the progression of this anxiety. There are so many different possibilities here. I don't want to make too many assumptions because it can look very differently. But at the very least, it sounds like this may be somewhat of a newer experience for you. For example, you mentioned that you're on edge and you're experiencing derealization, which is essentially a disconnect from experiencing reality where you feel like your perception of the world is different in some way. Some people say they feel like they're looking at the world through frosted glass or like there's Vaseline in front of their eyes. They're not really experiencing the world in the way they normally do. They feel slightly disconnected from it. That's an experience that can definitely happen with anxiety. And you also stated that you're afraid to go out in public. One of the questions that all of these symptoms bring up for me is whether you've experienced a significant trauma in your life. Whether it's full-blown PTSD or somewhere along that spectrum, it's common for people that have been traumatized to experience hypervigilance, which is that sense of always being on edge, always looking for danger. People who are hypervigilant also often startle very easily. They get scared and jumpy if there's a door that slams, a balloon that pops, somebody that yells, things like that. Strong anxiety reactions and this feeling of disconnecting from reality are also parts of PTSD or traumatic reactions in general. So that would be my first question for you. If you've been through something horrible and you're experiencing a traumatic reaction because of it, if that were the case, then you have a pretty good explanation for where this came from suddenly and a target for getting some help. That's one possibility. Another thing that I have mentioned time and time again on the podcast is to make sure that you're getting a medical workup. If you're truly amped up and experiencing such extreme anxiety most of the day, every day, we really want to make sure this isn't due to some sort of physical issue, because in some ways it kind of sounds like it could be. Certainly it could just be the mental health side, but that kind of gasoline on the fire that you're talking about makes me at least a little bit suspicious of the medical side. So please talk to your medical doctor about this issue. Make sure that you're getting thoroughly checked out. In some cases, metabolic issues like vitamin deficiencies can cause anxiety. Hyperthyroidism, where your thyroid gland is producing too much hormone, is another big candidate that can really make you have those physical sensations that mimic anxiety. It can raise your blood pressure and heart rate. It can make you feel like you're kind of on the verge of panic, even if it's just because of the chemical thing happening in your body. So get some thorough lab work, get some blood taken, make sure you're up to date with your doctor, you know what medications you're taking, you rule out side effects, you rule out all these physical causes, because that would be kind of a very simple explanation for why things are so disproportionately stressful and anxious for you. Part of the reason that I'm so concerned about this is that you listed a bunch of things that you have tried. You're obviously trying really hard, but it feels like nothing's working. Of course, we need to be sure the techniques you're using are solid techniques and that they've been trained and practiced, rather than the experience of being really, really anxious and then going, oh, I should try deep breathing, and then trying to deep breathe when you're already amped up and then realizing that's not helping. And so you spiral even further. A lot of people have had that experience. So we want to make sure that's not happening. But for you to have this experience where nothing seems to be making it budge, that does concern me that there could be something underlying, something more going on here. Again, the trauma, medical issue, something that's under the surface there. In your question, you also talked about needing to go to work, but feeling too scared, and needing to go to the grocery store, but feeling really scared when you're there, or too scared to even go. These are forms of avoidance. And I always say this, but avoidance is the fuel of anxiety. At its core, anxiety is a mechanism that's there to keep you safe from danger. In your everyday life, right now, anxiety warns you about danger that isn't necessarily actually there or true. Most likely, you're not going to be harmed if you go to work or to the store. But your body doesn't know that. Your body reacts as if there's a true danger there, the same way that it would if you were standing at the edge of a tall building and looking down without any railing in front of you. That physical sensation of fight or flight, that happens, but it's triggered by something that may or may not be true. It's triggered by your thoughts in that anticipation. So what happens then? What happens when your body tells you that you're in extreme danger? Typically, you listen to it and you try to remove yourself from that danger. In the case of these non-danger situations, that leads to avoidance. Every time you avoid something because your anxiety tells you that you can't handle it, or that it's a bad idea, that something terrible might happen, you make that anxiety stronger. You essentially reward your anxiety for keeping you safe, even though it's not actually keeping you safe in these instances. So when you're in therapy for anxiety, one of the primary goals is to help you start to approach these situations that cause anxiety rather than avoid them. And this is a process that we call exposure. You don't need to jump in all at once and do the most stressful thing for you, but gradually teaching your mind and your body that you can handle some anxiety without self-destructing actually helps you build a better tolerance for anxiety. And in the end, it helps you become less anxious in these situations in the first place. You mentioned as well in your question that you weren't sure if I've covered this before, and I do want to point you toward a couple podcast episodes that I've already done that could be helpful for you to listen to as well. Episode 195 is all about exposure work and anxiety. So that goes into much more detail about that topic I was just bringing up, the process of approaching instead of avoiding. Very, very good episode. Also, episode 395, which was fairly recent, I talked about agoraphobia, which is when you have a hard time leaving your house or leaving your safe space because of anxiety. And also, I talk a bit about the amygdala, which is the part of your brain that's essentially the go button for your anxiety. Very primitive part of your brain that kicks off that fight or flight response. So episode 195 and 395. You can find those on my website or on your podcast player on YouTube as well. Additionally, I have other resources. I have the Kick Anxiety's Ass online course that goes into a lot of detail about this stuff, my book, yada, yada, yada. All of those could be helpful. So if you don't have those yet, especially the online course and books, shoot me an email again. I'll hook you up with them for free. I do want to point out some other things and give you some steps to take right now. But really quick, let's take a break and talk about our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. We have had social media for a number of years now. And some of you listening may not even remember life without social media. However, despite our years of social media exposure, we can still really struggle with comparison. Whether it's seeing the perfect kitchen on Instagram or somebody that seems to have an effortlessly interesting life on YouTube, it's so easy to fall into the trap of envying others and judging your life based on what you see from them. In my experience, the best antidote to this kind of comparison trap is to learn more about yourself and what you want. Even if the idealized picture of other people's lives online were true, that doesn't have to threaten you when you can get in touch with what a beautiful life looks like to you. And that's where therapy can come in. If you're looking for somebody to help you find that clarity, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and designed to be convenient. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Duff today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Duff. So getting back into it, you mentioned that you anticipate your anxiety and wait for it to show up. This is a great point about anxiety, very wise for you to notice. It is anticipatory. There's a difference actually between anxiety and fear. Fear is when something scary happens to you and you react to that. Right? If you see a lion out in the wild and it's stalking toward you, you will be afraid if you know it's good for you. And that is a fear reaction to something actually happening. Anxiety is when you expect something bad to happen, and that gets you worked up in anticipation. If you know you're going to the zoo and you're going to see lions in cages, you might have anxiety expecting that something bad might happen and one might get out. That's anxiety rather than fear. Anxiety can also become very meta, where you're anxious about the prospect of having anxiety. That's kind of the crux of what we call panic disorder, where you have a panic attack and then you become essentially very worried about the potential of having another panic attack, especially in an area where you might not have a good escape or way to deal with the panic attack. So you can be so concerned about potentially having anxiety that you work yourself into a panic attack. So it can be very cyclical, very meta, like I said. You also might start to have a lot of what-if scenarios in your brain and find yourself ruminating on them over and over. And rather than answer those what-if questions, actually come up with a solution and come up with options or test it with some sort of action or experiment. People with anxiety tend to let themselves get worked up and then sort of leave it at that. And when I say let themselves, I don't mean that it's being lazy or some sort of personal flaw. This is how anxiety works. And it causes you to allow those thoughts to ruminate and linger rather than finding a solution to them or working them all the way to their end and realizing even if the worst case scenario did happen, you probably also still have options. As I said, it can be exhausting. It's mentally exhausting. You have to think about things through multiple brains. You have your regular brain, you have your anxiety brain. It's also physically exhausting. You might have muscle tension, other physiological symptoms of anxiety that actually literally wear you out. So is this just the way that you are now? Are you essentially a ball of anxiety? Nothing more than that? No, absolutely not. There are many options, and anxiety has been shown time and time again in the clinical research to be something that is treatable. It's one of the more treatable mental health conditions. Doesn't mean that it's easy, but it is treatable. That said, I think it's super important for you to take your situation seriously. You're suffering here. Anxiety is impacting your life in a very tangible and painful way. So I just ask, please don't gaslight yourself into thinking that you don't deserve help or you shouldn't be trying to get help. Anybody suffering with anxiety deserves to get help, regardless of how severe it is. But for you, I am worried about the severity. So let's try to get you some real help here. Self-help resources are awesome, but I imagine they're not going to be sufficient for what you're experiencing. It's not because they aren't helpful, but I think that the intensity of your anxiety is probably too high for you to really benefit from them right now. So what are the options? I already mentioned getting checked out by your doctor, so we know that you're not following a red herring with the whole anxiety thing in the first place. It might also make sense for you to ask your primary care doctor or talk to a psychiatrist about the potential of medication. There are various types here. I have certainly done episodes talking about medications, so you can search for medications on my website and find more info about that. But for example, benzodiazepines, these are medications that are meant to be sedating, and they're for situations where you're experiencing a really severe burst of anxiety symptoms and you need to just get calmed down a bit to get through. Then there are things like SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These are things that you take each day to lower the overall reactivity that you have. It kind of lowers that baseline for you. And please understand there are so many options under the medication umbrella. If you try one and don't like it, there are many, many different things that you can try. You can play with the type of medication. There are various medications even within the same class. You can play with the dosage. You can play with combinations if need be. So it's really important not to lose hope, even if you don't find the perfect medication right off the bat on the first try. Obviously, therapy is also a very good option here. This can be done alongside medication or by itself. Right now, I'm inclined to think that medication is the most important first step for you, aside from obviously medical check, because I don't really see how you're going to benefit a whole lot from therapy if you are out of your mind anxious 10 out of 10 in every moment. Very hard to focus and very hard to talk to people when you're like that. So you may need to start medication first to ease things up a bit and then get into the medication, rather the therapy. But when it is time to pursue therapy, you have a lot of options. You said you've been experiencing some of those agoraphobia-like symptoms where you're feeling scared to leave the house. Luckily, if you can't make it into an office in person, there are a ton of providers that do online therapy these days. If you want a guide to finding a therapist, you can check out duffthepsych.com/find-a-therapist, and I have a bit of a guide there for you. As I mentioned earlier, I wonder if you're experiencing a traumatic reaction. If so, you're going to want to be sure you pick a therapist that focuses on treating trauma specifically, that they are a trauma-focused therapist. Overall, a piece of advice would be to pick a therapist with a narrow focus. I just talked about this with Dr. McGrath on the previous episode. But having a therapist with a narrow focus rather than somebody who, say on Psychology Today, lists that they treat everything. If they say they treat OCD, PTSD, schizophrenia, relationship problems, couples issues, assessment, every problem in the world, then they probably don't have much of a specialty and they may not be what you're looking for here. Even though anxiety is a treatable issue, there are certainly some people that don't quite approach it in the most productive way. So try to find somebody who specifically clearly focuses on anxiety. It's fine if they focus on a few other things too, but make sure that somebody who knows what they're doing in this regard. And one way to tell that is how they talk about anxiety and also how narrow their focus is in that regard. So I would like you to jump on those things as soon as possible. In the interim, it might be a great idea for you to get a journal, print out some paper, any sort of format, and start writing things down. For example, if you could keep track of when anxiety happens to you, when it sort of peaks and comes on, what the fears that trigger it are, if you know what they are, what it feels like to you, where you're experiencing it in your body in terms of physical sensations, what happens in your mind. All of these things can help you build some self-awareness about what's playing out, which is valuable in itself, but then you can also bring that with you into treatment, into therapy, and really amp up the experience for you. You mentioned breathing exercises earlier, and while they haven't really worked for you too well yet, I do think it's worth still practicing. So if you could find one exercise that works well for you, a simple one would be box breathing. So breathing in for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, holding again for 4 before inhaling, and then starting the process over again. You can also do 4-7-8 breathing. So breathe in 4, hold 7, exhale 8. You can do alternate nostril breathing, many different breathing exercises. Go take a yoga class. That might be, an online yoga class in your case. Anything like that where you can find a good exercise and then practice it. Practice it most days of the week for a few minutes while you're in your safest location. I don't expect you to ever be fully unanxious, but where you feel the least anxious. Maybe that's in your house, maybe that's on your couch, wherever it might be. Do it when you're not out and really, really challenging yourself anxiety-wise. Do it when you feel safe and relatively calm, and just teach your body what it feels like to engage that part of your nervous system that brings things down a few notches. So get practicing on that. Don't worry about employing it out in the real world, so to speak, but just practice it and get really familiar with your favorite breathing exercise. And then if you find that this is all too much, you can't even focus well enough to find a therapist, you can't get the help that you need, there are other options. There are intensive outpatient programs, which are, programs where you are going in several times a week and doing really intensive group, individual therapy, sometimes with medication management, more of a wraparound service. There's also voluntary inpatient treatment, meaning checking yourself into a hospital where you can get a higher level of care and keep yourself safe, really to just sort of draw a line in the sand and get yourself more stabilized. There's also options there. But yeah, I really appreciate your question. Thank you for that. And I hope that things ease up for you soon. If you run into any snags, want to share any more, as I said, please stop by the Facebook group, and I really wish you the best. All right, and on to the second question. It reads, "Hi, Dr. Duff. I've been a fan of the podcast for about a year now, and I find your podcast very interesting, informative, and quite comforting. Thank you for what you do." You're very welcome. Thank you. I'm 31, and I have a BM, which I believe is a bachelor's in music, BM in music education, and I'm currently making a living from 3 different education-related part-time jobs. But as I get older, I think I'm ready for something stable with benefits that's full-time. I've been considering an MA in educational psychology, which is a master's degree, but I'm not sure if that's the right move. I've always been interested in psychology, and the job prospects certainly seem to fit my current interests. I'm curious about your input on pursuing psychology and education as a potential career, and if you have any advice, books, and or resources that can help guide me in the right direction. Thank you. Looking forward to the next episode. Hey, thank you for writing in. This is a really interesting question. I appreciate it. So basically what you're saying is you have a bachelor's degree in music education, and you're working within your field of study in a bunch of different part-time positions, but you're not really finding the stability that you crave as you're getting into your 30s. I think that's totally reasonable, and you should be looking forward to the future of your life. And it's okay that you're hoping for something that might be full-time with benefits at this juncture. I think it makes a lot of sense. As somebody who studied psychology, I know how it feels to be limited by your degree. When you have a bachelor's degree in psychology, you really can't do a damn thing with it. Maybe you can get into an HR type position at a company. You can work with very young people, like children with developmental disabilities, or very old people, like volunteering or working in, say, an assisted living facility. Or you can just ignore your degree completely and find whatever work you can, but you can't really get your hands dirty, so to speak, within the field of psychology with a bachelor's degree. For you, I imagine it's similar. You can do music education in a variety of ways, but you might not be able to find a job as a teacher or educator in a more formal sense without a more advanced degree. So you have a few options here when you're in a position like this. You can pick a different field and you can push to get more experience and go the experience and time route rather than education. Or you can go back to school, progress your education as you're talking about here, and hope that opens up some doors for you. Interestingly, I have found that quite a few people choose psychology as a second, third, fourth career. A lot of people that I was in school or internship with have had different careers. Sometimes older people who have had careers in finance or education or business that decide they want to come back and try something else that means more to them, or is just a pivot in their life, and they choose psychology. So to pivot like this definitely is not weird or unusual, especially since for you, you're staying within the broad field of education. It's not a huge leap that you're talking about here. It makes sense. Interestingly, my graduate program, so my PhD program was a graduate program in clinical counseling and school psychology program. So technically my PhD is in clinical counseling and school, with my emphasis being in clinical. And within my program, there were also master's students. So people that did the PhD and people that did masters. And so some of my friends did master's degrees in school psychology. This is obviously slightly different than educational psychology, but there is a lot of overlap, and job prospects can be similar or overlapping in that same way. The reason I mention this is that I can think of at least a couple people off the top of my head that I personally know who stopped at a master's degree in school psychology, didn't go for their PhD, and they're doing great. They're doing better than I am in their careers and just how successful their life is. So you can definitely make a great living and a great career for yourself with that kind of degree. With a master's in educational psychology, you could work within the schools to support students' mental health, to assess for things like learning disabilities or accommodations, and provide interventions, even counseling to an extent. You could be an educational consultant or an academic counselor. And within the private sector, there's a lot of jobs that value educational psychology as well. So you definitely have a lot more prospects and flexibility if you were to complete that master's degree. One thing I would want you to consider would be the cost and feasibility of completing the program. Totally reasonable to invest in your education and your future career, but depending, it may or may not be worth putting yourself into insane debt over, especially if you might not be sure about job availability in your area or if it's kind of more of an experiment for you. This leads me to another point. If you have the ability to reach out to some people in the field, that would be a very smart thing to do. If you have any personal connections, great place to start. I also think that LinkedIn may be your best friend here. I went on LinkedIn earlier and searched for just educational psychology in the search bar up there. And that yielded a lot of potential leads for information. There were groups on there. There were job listings that, list that as a requirement or as a focus area. There were articles about people discussing educational psychology. And then also a list of people that have different degrees or jobs within educational psychology that you could try to connect with and ask some questions to. So I highly encourage you to do some research and learn more about the realities of having that degree, especially within your geographic area if you're planning on staying there. On more of a positive side, you may also want to consider the importance of this to you, how well this fits with your values and goals in life. Does the idea of working within the field of educational psychology just feel right? Does it light up your soul? Because that matters too. Any subfield of psychology is not easy work. It's always going to be a bit of a challenge. And it really, really helps to have a passion for what you do. It can be extremely rewarding work. And you want to get into it for the right reasons. If you're just getting into it only for finances, that's really not the best idea. If you're getting into it because the job prospects look good and it's something you're really passionate about, that's perfect. Aside from LinkedIn, like I mentioned earlier, another source of good information might be Facebook groups. For example, I'm in some Facebook groups for psychologists, such as the Testing Psychologist Facebook group. And on there, I often see people that come in that are students or people that are thinking about pursuing a job in the field, and they'll come in with questions. And generally, it's very inviting. Questions will be answered and they'll be pointed in the right direction to get more information. As far as books, I'm not sure. I'm sure that there are great books out there. There often are for various psychology careers and even for school. I remember when I was in the end of my bachelor's program, I lived and died by, I think it was called The Insider's Guide to Doctoral Programs in Clinical and Counseling Psychology. That I read it cover to cover. I followed the entire thing. It was my Bible at that time. And I'm sure something like that exists out there for you as well. I just don't know it off the top of my head. So all this is to say that I don't think it's a crazy idea at all. However, you definitely want to do your research. It's a great field to get into, many different potential options. You even have options later on to take your expertise and combine it with your passions for music and such, create your own deal down the line. So a lot of good potentials there. I'm very excited for you and I'm proud of you for thinking about your future and trying to take a good step for yourself. So best of luck. And with that, that's the end of episode 407, everybody. Thank you very much for listening in. Don't forget that you can send me questions using the contact form at duffthepsych.com/contact. You can also email me, duffthepsych@gmail.com. If you haven't yet, it would mean the world to me if you would rate and review the show. If you're on YouTube, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and share it with somebody if you think it would be useful for them. Until the next time, you got this.